go live.
I'm gonna have to step away 1 minute.
Okay,
Hold on.
no worries. Meeting is now streaming live on YouTube. Hello, everybody. This is uh, the Regenerative Consciousness Rising podcast. And my name is Jul, and this is being put on by the IRN. And today's topic is mental wellness and healing in these times, these uncertain times, which I was thinking about that term uncertain times, and I realized, when has the times we lived in ever been certain? I don't know. So it just I'd like to just frame this conversation and then introduce our wonderful guests that are going to share their wisdom and have a dialogue with us about this subject. And but first, I just give a little bit of a framing about where we're going with this, and why. Uh, Going back to the times, that we're living in, we why is it such a big deal right now about mental health, and why are the times so uncertain right now? Well, we all kind of, I think there's no controversy about the fact that we are in times that we've been reaping the choices of many years of the way we're doing things on the earth. Uh, the fossil fuel economy, the extractive economy, the colonized culture that many of us are have grown up in and are part of, and that is all about profit and um, extracting resources without thinking about the impact that it has on the earth and on each other and on ourselves. And so these kinds of choices have been going on for a long time. It's nothing new, but the fact that we've been doing it a long time and that now there's more and more people, it's really reached a level of urgency with climate change and with everything, environmental destruction, and so many things that we're faced with now as a species. Um, and of course, because of that, mental health is a big deal, and it's becoming that's also becoming, I think we talk about COVID as a pandemic. I believe that we could even call mental health a pandemic right now, because people are, you know, realizing that, we have to change our ways, and what does that look like? How do we even do that? And so the overwhelm, the grief, the despair of what's going on the earth is affects our mental health. And then there's the trauma that has been passed down through generations that people are grappling with, and our own personal trauma. So there's many levels of trauma, collective trauma, that is all coming to light for so many people these days. It's sort of like we can't hide the elephant in the room anymore. It's like, okay, we have to face this, and this is mental health is needs to be central in and attended to in how we go forward in our change making in the world and in our cultures. And what does that look like? How do we do that? What are some tools? Clearly, the mental health system that we have in place is not set up to accommodate this much bigger question around mental health. And the guests that are here that I've been part of the Inner Resilience Network, participated in several things before, and I'm just so happy that they're here, because they actually are really bring a really important perspective. Ikela is a PhD student, and he is just stepping into, well, he's been in the mental health world for a while, but he's stepping into it in a bigger way now, and he'll share a little bit about that. Uh, and with the intention to bring change to it, and to really work from within, and what does that look like, and what are the needs, um, and then Lisa Grayshield, who has given a talk with us before about the indigenous ways of knowing and mental health, and she was a professor of in the counseling department in the University of New Mexico, and she stepped out of the academic and the that mental health kind of system to return to her tribal work, and also bring that indigenous way of knowing and approach to mental health, because and she'll share about that, and I'm sure much more. But it's interesting that, Ikela is stepping in and Lisa has kind of stepped out, and so there's this very complementary kind of perspectives here about mental health, and I'm kind of in the middle myself, sort of stepped in, stepped out. I'm sort of more of a, alternative, community-based approach, grassroots, mutual aid type of approach to mental health, and that's where I've decided to focus my attention, with real tools that can empower people in their lives, and continuously trying to explore that and deepen in that. So, so welcome, Ikela, and welcome, Lisa. I am just so excited to have you both here and to have this conversation. Hopefully, this conversation will be helpful to all of you out there listening. And now that I've framed the conversation and just kind of like started us off, I want to just take a moment of grounding. And we are, in these podcasts, the intention is to have some experiential tools as well as, good conversation. And Ikla will share a little bit of a some kind of practice. I assume it's a mindfulness practice later on. And Lisa will I don't know what Lisa will share, but hopefully she'll share something experiential. And so we'll just take a moment though to start it off with just a little bit of a grounding. And I want to just invite everybody here and out there listening, whether you're listening to us live or to this recording, that you just take a moment and just feel your breath. Just feel where you are, just getting present to yourself, present to your body. Feeling the earth beneath you, holding you, supporting you. Just really remembering that connection to yourself, to your breath, to the earth. It's always there. And feeling our hearts, just breathing into our hearts. A little bit of gratitude for coming together and for this day. Yeah. Well, thank you. Thank you for grounding with us. And yeah, let's begin our conversation from this nice connected place. And yeah, the first question, I guess, that I want to just kind of put out and invite. I think I'll invite Ikela first, just to just speak on this, and Lisa after, just a little bit of just introduction, and then Lisa, I'd like to hear from you too. But just just how do you experience the mental health uh, system right now? Like, let's get present to what's happening right now in the world, because you're right in it. You're in the middle of it, and just share a little bit about your first self first, and then after you just share about that, then like to pass it over to Lisa. And Lisa, I really I picked Ikela first because I know you're still waking up a little bit, so I hope that's okay. Anyway, go ahead, Ikela. Just how are you and who are you and what's your thoughts?
Cool. Yeah, so I'll just start by saying it's such a joy to sit with both of you. And I love both of you, and I'm super excited for this conversation because you both inspire me. So about me, I'm currently working on a PhD in clinical psychology at the University of New Mexico. Um, I, before starting this program, was a substance use counselor at a MAT program where we provided like methadone and Suboxone for individuals who were working through recovery from opioids. And I served that in that role for like 2 years in my hometown, um, and got really introduced like hands-on to how difficult things can be for people to get the support and the help they need just to live a fulfilling and meaningful life. And so that kind of motivated me to step into this new role as a student and hopefully at some point like a leader in some extent um, within like the field of mental health, to try to frame things in a way that can be more healthy for everyone, more inclusive for everyone. And I think I hope more grounded from like a caring and collective place rather than like a individualized and biomedicalized place. Yeah, and so I guess to the question you asked, there's a lot of answers I feel like when trying to describe like the current state of things. The first word that came to my mind though was just overwhelmed. The current pandemic we're all living through has really taxed, I mean, everyone, not just straight up everyone, regardless of their involvement with the mental health field, but a lot of the frontline providers have been receiving a lot of demand, and a lot of that demand hasn't been able to be met. Within like our program here, we have a massive waiting list of people who are seeking services in the community who are not able to provide care for, simply just because of numbers and logistics. And then I also think like from another point of view, the field as a whole right now has a framing that maybe I can talk about a little bit later on, because I could go off on this for a while. A framing of seeing mental health as a disorder of like the brain or a disorder of the individual, and kind of remove from the contextual environment that the individual's within. And I think that leaves us pretty underwhelmed as clinicians and as communities to try to make things more healthy and better for ourselves and our communities. When we see people as having a disorder, such as like they are depressed or they are anxious, and we lose the context of the disconnection they have with a community or with the family or with the earth that holds them, and we in a way label that issue as primarily coming from them, I think it leaves us pretty underpowered in being able to meet the current moment of the pandemic and all the stressors that's bringing on a lot of people. So so in summary, I'll just say it's like pretty overwhelmed right now from a clinician's point of view, and then underpowered in our ability to actually bring about change in the best ways possible. The ways that it's like very clear that how we can improve, but we just don't have the infrastructure necessarily to do that just yet. So, yeah.
Thank you, Ikela. I'm definitely looking forward to digging deeper into that. Um, yeah, so Lisa, welcome. And
Hung Maheji, and thank you, Julia. I just, grateful to get to be asked to speak again. You've been such a sister to me since we met at Standing Rock, and it seems like some of the ties and bonds that I made with people in just the short time that I served in the mental wellness teepee at Standing Rock until now are way closer than any ties that I made in 15 years of teaching at the university. So Washu Demotmo Ket Letle Kashanati Digum Dia, Dr. Lisa Grayshield. I'm from Northern Nevada. I'm a Washoe tribal member. My people have been in the areas of Northern Nevada, the Sierra Nevada mountain range at the top since time immemorial. And our legend stories take us back to the stars. And our legend stories tell us that we come from the stars and that we were planted where we were at. So fast forward that through colonization and all of these things, that we have all come to know. And I think that the first challenge that I see, I have my PhD in counseling and psychology. Why did I do that? I felt that I wanted to help the world, but I didn't understand that the paradigm was a different paradigm. I didn't understand that going in because I see the world through my own point of view, right? We're all a little egocentric like that. We tend to think that people think the way we think. And anyway, what I found out is that the whole concept of mental health to begin with is not a concept that's understood in Indigenous cultures, and certainly not our culture. Mental health, what is that? What does it mean? And what happened is we created this whole construct of ill health in our society by streamlining the paradigm that we live in and then forcing everybody else into that paradigm. So here we are. And now we've been so constricted, and we're using a single language. We're using pharmaceuticals. We're really kind of in this current struggle right now to regain our connection to Dila Idi, Mother Earth, to regain that connection as the nurturer of all of life. We're organic beings. We come from the earth. The more we move from that organicness, whether it be intellectually or physical, however it is, from our understanding that we come from the earth, then, perhaps that disconnect puts us into an identity that we so desperately try to continue. And we just continue that. Now, I know that's at a big macro level. And so when we get down to the micro level with what Ikea was talking about, and we don't remember the context because we're still trying to apply theories of mental health that have been standardized in our mental health industry, for which we have to meet as students. And I, quite honestly, was well into my PhD program kind of going, what? Maybe I'm just not that smart. Maybe I'm just maybe I'm missing a screw somewhere that I can't understand the intelligence of some of the processes that I was being taught in the PhD program. Because when I sit with somebody and I'm working with them from the time I was very young, I could feel them. And if I had a little bit more knowledge about chakra systems and neuroscience, the way that the brain functions, because we understand that, trauma has a physiological impact that impacts the way that we think psychologically. So those, I didn't even have a neuroscience class. Here I am, a PhD, and I didn't understand that until well into my own research and my own study. Another thing that I had never had was I had never had an Indigenous Native professor or teacher. So I was in a kind of a state of confusion for a while as I was trying to glean the intelligence of the paradigm that I was being offered, because I innately know that we're all valuable. We come onto this earth valuable, whether we've got cerebral palsy or whether we've, some other thing came through, whatever from our lineages that we may be working through. We are perfect as we are. And when we step into the center of ourselves, which can be a journey, especially in this world, but when we do make that journey and step into the center of ourselves and we assist, then we give permission for everybody around us to step into the center of their selves. And then we interact as equals, no matter what our position in life is. And we seek to create that balance within the world. So, for me, the whole concept of mental health was really challenging, but I am doing a lot of work in mental health in Native communities and with writing, working along with a team of people to revise curriculum standards so that they are more applicable to Indigenous communities. Anyway, I'll just say that much. Thank you, Jul. It's an honor and a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so that you've been working to change the system, and Ikela's coming in and getting overwhelmed by the need of he's seeing that in the system, and is it possible? I guess the first question is, um, you know, do can we change this system? I mean, can the mental health system be do we need to step out of it, in order to really meet the need of mental health in general? And what does that look like? And or can we change the system? I mean, the system itself is born of a, a very a frame of mind that is also very colonized, right? So as you know, Lisa, as you spoke to, it's just like, so getting back to Indigenous way of understanding mental health is does that necessitate actually stepping out of the system, because the system itself is how it's the framework itself is premised on a way of thinking that is part of the sickness. I guess that's my question. Or is it possible to change that? And I know that could be a very provocative thing to say if there's mental health people out there and therapists out there that are listening and going, well, they're very in the system. So I don't want to discount that. There's a lot of good that's happening and is continuing to happen within the system. I definitely am not discounting that at all. I mean, it's just that the need now it's not meeting the need that is out there. And what kind of change do we need to be bringing? Or do we need to just be stepping out of the system, you know, or what? So like Lisa, you've stepped out of the system. So Ikela, I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
Sure. Yeah, I think first off, Lisa, I just like love absolutely everything you just said. And I think what you recognized in the lack of training that you received in for maybe lack of a better word, being able to bring your true authentic healing self into the current system that was there, is very telling. And what I think is really beautiful is like your heart knew where to go next. Your heart knew it was not to stay, from what I'm hearing, not to stay within the system, but to leave the system and go to where you could have that impact that your heart was calling for. And to answer your question, Joe, I kind of think that that's it, is like each of us has, I like to believe, a certain role to play in this life, and for some individuals, like that role does not involve being inside of this manualized treatment modality world that mental health has become, this idea that we have like diseases that are individualized to people and disconnected from the constructs and the context that they're in. But then for some, their hearts are drawn, like mine, to go into that system and try to bring wisdom and bring healing and help it grow and progress. Because from my point of view, that's kind of the whole point of this life thing, is to just do our parts to continue to actualize beauty and love in the world. And so short answer is like, most definitely, I believe the system can be changed. And I've seen it happen. I mean, since I've started counseling at least a couple of years ago. And so that's only like 3 years I've seen change happen. Now, how to do that is a bigger, broader question that I think is nuanced. And there's many different perspectives that can inform how to do that. And one of them, exactly as Lisa was saying, was getting in touch with Indigenous communities, and like welcoming those voices into these constructed, colonized places that we currently like seat the best psychologists and best counselors and whatever we want to call them culturally. There's a whole different value system when I think we can listen to and take on the more collective and communal voices of many people, not just Indigenous peoples, also like that's why I think diversity is hell important, right? It's like it welcomes in so many other points of views. But yeah, I think really just moving outside of keeping things individualized. I think that is like such an illness right now within the current mental health field that I'm in and I'm working in. The training I'm getting is we focus just on the person, like what's wrong with them, what can they do better, and we just completely miss the fact that like things are really kind of dark right now. People are very disconnected. A lot of people, I don't remember the statistics top of my head, but like this is the most disconnected people have been from one another potentially in human history. right? Like the amount of people that can't turn towards a close friend when things get tough right now is terrible. And the disconnection that we have politically and societally, to where we, you know, whether you're wearing a mask or not, is suddenly like you're disconnected and in opposition from people. Like all of that is incredibly impactful on a human being's mental state. And when we sit down with a client and run them through cognitive behavioral therapy step by step, as the manual says, and think that that's actually going to do any significant good, we're fooling ourselves, you know. And I'll pause soon, but one other thing I'll say is just I think, like Lisa was pointing to, the whole construct of like what mental health and what mental illness is kind of is a myth. I think there's human suffering, and that exists in the world. But as soon as we start to try to break human suffering down into these really compartmentalized diagnoses that we can place on someone, we miss the actual beauty of what might actually be happening within whatever disorder we're giving them. Oftentimes, if someone's feeling anxious, right, there's an adaptive quality to that. There's a wisdom that can inform us in our lives from feeling anxious. There's a wisdom that can inform our lives about a feeling of depression, that can speak to the way we're relating with our environment and the world around us. And so even the construct of like what mental health and mental illness is can really be informed by Lisa and her communities, and so many other communities that have not yet been fully embraced inside of the academic and institutionalized mental health system. So yeah, I'll stop there, I think.
Thank you so much for what you're saying, Ikela. I always say your name wrong. You never, since I met you, I say your name wrong, but Ikela. I also just want to say thank you for recognizing, you know, that there is wisdom. There's wisdom in all of us. And, you know, Jul, I think you showed a lot of wisdom by stepping into the world that you stepped into, you know, to learn the different healing modalities that you know, so that when you see an individual person, you can address them as a whole person, you know, body, mind, soul, and spirit, you know, so you're definitely on the right track. And, you know, I can say that, you know, my journey through academia has definitely served me, especially now as I act as a bridge between our tribal programs and federal government funding agents in, you know, in trying to help the funding agents understand how to help Indigenous people so that we can continue to be Indigenous people. And a lot of that includes things like, you know, addressing issues of land base and water, and, you know, those, and, you know, opportunities back to our natural plants and medicines. And, you know, the majority of the Indigenous medicine people that I know have not stepped outside of their Indian communities or the Native communities in general, because, you know, there's an understanding within those communities when we're doing ceremony. When I was as a professor, I really stepped out and I took a chance, a really big chance. And I redefined what mental health was from an Indigenous perspective and wrote, you know, quite a bit about that. And spoke on it. And so while the Western structure is a diagnosis and treatment structure, we are not going deep enough in our understanding of where things get disconnected. You know, when we make that disconnect from the earth as organic beings, we know in our ceremonies, you go back to the earth, you crawl, you know, a sweat lodge is about crawling on the ground, feeling that dirt and that earth beneath your body, your naked body, not naked, you know, but your hands and your feet as you're crawling into the lodge and recognizing that we're organic beings. And you're sitting with these hot, hot rocks, you know, that have been heated by the fire, and we're putting water on that, and that steam is coming up, and all those prayers are happening. And I, you know, definitely understood that as not just effective for my own people and my own community, but, you know, if the mental health world were indigenized, we would be learning about plants and ceremony, because it's not about diagnosis and treatment. It's more, wellness is more about symptom and outcome. What are we experiencing? And what do we want to experience? And oftentimes we even miss that piece. You know, we miss that piece because we get stuck in this Western scientific method that says, first, We have to identify the problem so we can address the problem. So fortunately, there's a lot of amazing work that can be done between the universities, the governmental systems, and the tribal nations, because there seems to be a bit of a window of opportunity that has opened up where the intellectual world is recognizing the wisdom of Indigenous people. And also I want to take that further, because we are all Indigenous. And, appropriation has become a challenge. We wouldn't say that everybody should learn how to run a sweat lodge and go teach that. That's not what we're saying here. There's plenty of people who do those things that come from their lineages, and there's a natural way that those things get passed on. So we couldn't put that in a program necessarily, but we could provide the experience of it. We could help our students understand plants and, what plants are all about, from simple plants like teas and tinctures, and just sitting with the plants in general, and types of plants in the different areas, and what they're teaching us about our impact on them as partners, in this natural world. It's not that big of a stretch of an imagination to realize that we could open our consciousness to step into that, because I had a small group of students who were as confused as I was, and I recognized that confusion in them in my term as a professor at the university. And some of them were Native and some of them were non-Native, but we came together and created a program for ourselves that allowed us to become the bridges between these. And those students are now doing that work. There's one student that is creating a Native healing program within her master's department in the Navajo Nation at Dene College. It's just being created. It's just being talked about. Is it even going to happen? We don't even know, but the conversation is on the table, because we are recognizing that we do need to go a little deeper than what this paradigm has to offer. And there are very real problems on the ground that we need to address, by bringing ourselves there. And so to me, a program would be about that inner healing and that journey inward, so that we could step out into the world as we are intuitively, and position ourselves in places that will make a benefit. And we're the only ones that know what that is. So yeah, I'll say that much right now. Thank
Oh
you.
man, that's amazing, Lisa. Thank you for sharing all that. That's really rich. There's so many threads in there that I want to pull at, but the one that's the most prominent for me right now is kind of connects to what Ikela was saying, which is, that, what you're seeing, Ikela, is that, people are, they like, there's a hyper individualization, like there's just so much focus on the person. And what I'm hearing, Lisa, like you're saying, one of the most significant aspects of Indigenous approaches to mental health is understanding the context and the connection, the social connection, the web that we're in. And so, like, how do we bring that, like that healing is about reconnecting and healing. I mean, really, mental health is about not just focusing in on ourselves, but seeing how we're connected to each other. And that, like, for instance, I'm now in this program. I've been in this kind of a student in this training with maybe you've heard of Thomas Hubel. He's based in Europe, and he's kind of really doing some very cutting edge stuff around collective healing and collective, last year we did training on collective trauma. Now he's doing one on collective healing. And how do you do that? How do you how do you bring healing to the collective as opposed to just the individual? And it's not an either or. You have to be doing both. It's like we need to continue to do our own personal healing, but to expand that out into the network that we're part of, this culture that we're part of, like, it's time for us to be doing that. And I feel like, Lisa, what you're bringing, like, around the Indigenous perspective, is that's like the heart of it. It's like the Indigenous message, even if we don't call it that, or even if it's called something else within the mental health system, maybe we don't call it the Indigenous approach or something. It would be great if we did, but maybe there's other ways we call it. But ultimately, it's the same thing, which is that it's reconnecting, to the web, to each other, to this web that we're part of, that we can't set ourselves out of. You know, we can't just be separate from it and think that we can heal. So that's what I'm hearing. You know, you're saying, and Ikela is saying that you're seeing the this is part of the problem. Am I hearing that right, Ikela? I mean,
Yeah, most definitely. And I kind of have a question for you, Lisa, that I would love to hear your answer from. As I've learned more about you and your family and your heritage and your roots, I've come to identify like a set of values that might not be totally absent in Western culture, but are definitely not as prioritized, such as like community, right? And such as like the real sacredness of like ancestry and leadership from elders. And I think that from my point of view is something that, I mean, very simply could be introduced into current Western models of mental health. Is just taking these like value systems that underlie kind of like what Jul was talking about, indigenous ways of knowing the world, and placing them within the current constructs that are there. So I'm just curious, Lisa, like if you had to point out like the most significant values that inform mental health from an indigenous perspective, what would you say those are? That interests me.
Well, I love that question. And I've definitely been pondering, well, what does it mean then? You know, it's easy to kind of, you know, criticize one structure, but, you know, what are we going to? And so in some of my writings and my research, you know, I put myself on a diet of reading all the Indigenous authors. And now I have the pleasure of sitting on work groups with them to create, like, for example, curriculum for Indian child welfare programs. How do we train our people to work in these Native communities? And so, you know, we came up with like these 7 constructs. Now, they're not complete necessarily with the respect, but the constructs of them are complete, and we could translate them into many different ways. But the first one, and I call them the I walk healing states, meaning, you know, what does it actually mean to be well in this world? What's happening when we're well? Because I might be well and I might feel good, and I'm doing all my kayaking and mountain climbing and all the things that connect me with nature so that I can feel vital in my body. But I still may not, but, you know, I still need to step into that world of helping other people, you know, to regain that balance. So we're not truly well if there's a lot of turmoil going on into the world. We are obligated as human beings on this earth to assist with that balance. And some of us are here specifically for that reason, and some of us are here for other reasons. But for those of us who are watching this, if you've gotten this far into the, you know, into this viewing, then I would suspect that you're here because you genuinely want to have an impact on the communities and the people that you work with. So here's what we came up with from an Indigenous perspective. And I'm going to read just some of them off of this so that I don't get lost. So the first one is that true healing happens at a community level. And Ikela, you talked all about that. You know, true healing does happen at a community level. You know, so it's important for us to share our gifts and to be who we are. And the second one is the earth is the source of all food and medicine. We don't need to process it all the way down to these little forms of pills and then mass produce it and send it out. We can find our own medicine. You know, we do need to have some learning about that, and maybe even some bridging between the medicines of the Western world and the natural medicines in their natural state. And so all of our information is valuable in bridging that. But, you know, that would be the goal, to return to the earth for the source of our food and medicines, in addition to the sun, the earth and the sun. You know, the sun is the only true source of vitamin D. And, you know, with all this COVID going on, we need a lot of vitamin D in our body. So we want to ensure that we're out there in the sun, because an injection of vitamin D or a pill of vitamin D is going to disregard the amount of vitamin D that we might need based on who we are as a cultural person, as a, you know, where we live, our lifestyles, those kinds of things. And I don't know, we don't know really what the challenges are. I don't know what the challenges would be with that mega dose, but we need to get out in the sun. And so the third one is that water is life. And, you know, water is everything. We're primarily made up of water, you know, so as we work towards protecting our water sources and speaking up for the lifeblood of Mother Earth, we remember that we need that water. We depend on that water. We drink that water all the time. Water is first medicine. We get up in the morning and have a glass of water or some lemon in your water and give thanks for the fact that we can drink good water. The next one is that we want to learn our languages. Our languages. English is it's a streamlined form of understanding the world, and it's difficult sometimes to have an explanation of something that's indigenous because it's more complex. This means this. This is what this means. That it isn't like that in native languages. I remember asking my elders once, I said, how do we say peace? I met this guy who was making all these medallions in every language, and he had the word peace, and he wanted to put washo. And I'm like, well, how do we say peace? I don't know really how we say it. It's something you do. It's what happens. And so I asked these elders, how do we say peace? And so they talked about it. And what they came up with was digum hiki anga hulel. And digum hiki anga hulel means we're all doing it together with our hands. We're working together. That's what we're doing. And that's okay. Well, that's how we say peace, that we're doing it together. So learning our languages, really going back to those threads of our first languages and understanding them. And when I say my prayers in my language, I feel those prayers, at the depth of my being. And the next one is that we focus on the positive. Certainly we have to address the trauma. It has to be addressed. It is there. It cannot be ignored. The impact of trauma is alive in our bodies. It's alive in our communities. We see those things. So we need to address those. And in addressing those, we need to remember to be able to help people focus on the positive. As I was on my journey for healing and really trying to have an understanding of what my position in life was, I began to recognize that I can see that in people. If I sit still within myself, and a lot of it is learning that self-love piece too, really appreciating ourselves and understanding that we came here, to bring something beautiful. We're going to bring something. We're going to have one impact or another wherever we go. So it's important for us to recognize, what kind of impact we want to have. And I realized that, I could look at you and I could see your highest expression, even if you couldn't see it. And, perhaps maybe I'll wave a feather in front of you or something, and bam, all of a sudden you could see it, or maybe you could see it through my eyes or something, and so, and I figured out that, that's not some huge magic anything. That's just good medicine. It's good medicine to sit with people and to be able to see them, for their highest expression. So the next one is that ceremonial practices reconnect us with spirit. And so it's important that we engage the ceremonial practices with the understanding that there, in this time where many Indigenous people are stepping out and sharing, and then non-Native people are taking on a lot of these things, and they're done in very good ways. But occasionally, an appropriation will happen, and the intention of those people leading those ceremonies may not be in alignment with the purpose of them. And so it's always a cautionary for a lot of Indigenous people, and they step out sometimes with caution. I have a very close friend who carries numerous ceremonies in a pipe. And as I share with him the ceremonies that I've been engaged in, there's a bit of a, wow, you're really brave, to step out like that, and he's right, because, you open yourself up for a lot of things, because sometimes, the understanding from a Western perspective is, oh, I want to do that. I want to be like that. I'm going to take that and then I'm going to do it. As opposed to really, it's about stepping into your own highest expression. Because once you do that, it doesn't matter whether you're leading a ceremony or whether you're writing a book or whether you're running, or doing an athletic event, when you're doing it from that place of authenticity within yourself, it's going to have a beautiful impact. And so it's important for us to do that. And so we do have to watch out for appropriation. I always have to put that in there but if you have opportunities to experience these kind of ceremonial practices, I just highly recommend it. And maybe you get enough time to hang around it long enough where you can learn something from it and then have the blessing of the people that are there. to begin to experience that on a regular basis. So the last one that I have written on this page, and again, like I said, these are only like little areas that we've broken down, and we could really expand them and have conversations on every one of them. The last one is the social and restorative justice responsibility that we all have as a human being walking on this earth, to stand up for clean water and regaining our access to the air and even soil. There's a huge movement on the ground that's looking at the very soil that we grow our food in and the toxins that have been put in there and the mycelium. There's a huge movement to understand mushrooms and the important role that they play in our soils. And when we disrupt that by putting concrete and all these things that we're doing on the earth, and we think that's a standard, without understanding the disruption that we're causing to her, it's just the same thing that we do to our own bodies, right? If you put a lot of products on your face and your skin, eventually you're going to clog your pores and they're not going to do their job. And then you're going to get all wrinkly like we all do at some point. But we do want to, let's go back to the very natural things of life. And, so anyway, I'll say that much. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. That was a whole amazing, chunk in itself there. Just your principles, and so valuable, and bringing it, like that, remembering that doing these lifestyle principles are what bring mental health to us, which is what we're talking about here. And like, how can we have a question, actually somebody wrote here, how do we connect beyond this conversation? So how do we bring those ideas, into here and now, and people that are experiencing right now, maybe some challenge. Ikela, do you have some thoughts about that? Or
Yeah, I definitely do. Just take a moment before I jump into it, because that all you shared, Lisa, is there's so much richness.
Yeah,
Oh
it's
my
amazing.
goodness. Yeah. So in terms of like application, like what might we be able to do right now? I think it helps to understand kind of the framing we've been moving around in this whole conversation, in that like individual mental health is inseparable from collective mental health, right? When we have a sick society, we're going to have sick people. And when we have more sick people, we often promote more sicknesses within the community. And so for me, what has been incredibly healing in my life this far, in my 24 years, has been connecting with a community. And for me, that's been a Sangha, where we get together, we meditate, we practice mindfulness. We have really authentic conversations about how we can live authentically in this world and live in ways that promote the alleviation of suffering in ourselves and others. And I think especially right now, with how isolated everyone has been with COVID, and there's this like somewhat like awkward trying to come back together to some sense of like connection. The first thing I could say is like find community, and even if that's like a couple people. Like I had a Sangha once where it was just me and one other person, and that other person had a autoimmune illness where he couldn't always participate. And there were times where I would just go to our group that we had scheduled every week, and I would sit. And I mean, there was maybe 10, 15 times where I was the only one there, and I would still do our practices. I would still read. And eventually it became 2, and then 3, and then 4, and then 5. And eventually we have now a group of like 8 to 10 people. And it just built over time, and it built in a real authentic way. It wasn't forced. It just naturally kind of unfolded. So that would be my first answer, is seek support and seek community. And don't think that you can or should do it on your own. That's again one of those like illnesses these myths from Western culture that's been infused inside of the mental health sphere, is like, this is somehow your problem and you should fix it, when in reality, like, man, we're all struggling together, and so like we need each other to find help through this.
That brings up, it's like, I mean, it's funny because, just speaking from my own perspective, I mean, I know that the community is important. I've struggled with that because of the isolation, and I find myself hearing my own thoughts around like, well, I can't talk about my own problems with other people because they have enough of their own. Their people are all, they all have their own burdens. Nobody wants to hear hear mine. So it's like that kind of self-talk. And I notice it. I'm very, because I've been in this world myself. And so it's like, okay, there's that thought, but it's very real. And it's like this, one of the things that stops us from really connecting is our fear of just being vulnerable and reaching out and just like actually having a need, because there's so much conditioning around, like, you've got to have it together and present this face of whatever that is. It's like, I don't know. So I don't know if either of you can speak to that. I think you know what I'm trying to get at here.
Yeah, I think I just agree. Everybody can hear me. That we need community, community around that, and certainly within that community, people that we can open up a space and share and release. And so I think that's, absolutely incredibly important. And, I think also it's really, in addition to numerous other things, so I won't run down the list, but I think it's important to reconnect with nature, and reconnect, nature, there's a vibration, right? Scientifically now we can show that there is a vibration in the earth. And when you walk barefoot on the earth and you make those connections, you could bring about change, especially when we're doing it mindfully. Right. And so, getting out in nature and sitting still and quiet with ourselves and really helping to bring ourselves meditation, bringing ourselves back into our center. So all those practices that really help us to reconnect with ourselves, we know which ones are right for us. I think are very critical, in addition to paying attention to the vibration of the food that we're bringing into our bodies, so, that body, that food will connect us as well, because the sun feeds the plants that feed us. And, when we're eating plants that are not sun fed, or all these kinds of things, that are happening, sometimes we miss a little bit of that. And we get those deficiencies. And sometimes I think the deficiencies really mean that, it's like, I know it's been cold and cloudy out, so I haven't been outside for about 3 or 4 days, and I got kind of lazy because I was working on a book. And I was like, Lisa, practice what you preach, get outside. I could tell by my sleep that things were that I needed to pay attention to myself. So I think that, really understanding the wellness within ourselves, because we are the tools, where each and every one of us is important where we're at, even if it's just to bring a smile, or, to cook a good meal, it's all so important for us to step into our center. So, in addition to, all of those things about finding community, but also finding quiet spaces are critical also, to sit
What
with.
about this a comment I made about self-talk, like, I mean, I go out in the earth and I'll do all this stuff, but if I have a self-talk program running that I can't, I'm wanting to be in community, but I'm afraid, or whatever that self-talk is, and I think it's pretty common. So I don't know, just some thoughts around that.
Sometimes those thoughts that roll around in our brain they come from deep childhood kinds of things, and it's challenging. And sometimes we do need a little help. I would like to be able to say, okay, well, let's talk about this, and then, and then let's release this, so that we create different stories for ourselves. But some of those things are so deep that we need a little help.
Yeah,
and sometimes some strategies and
yeah. Sorry, that's what I'm trying to get at. The very thing that sometimes I've noticed people need help with is what keeps them from actually
Right.
reaching out to get that help. So
Mhm.
that's the conundrum that I'm trying to highlight here, which is I'm seeing being a real mental health issue. I don't know, Ikela, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I just want to echo what you said, Lisa. Like a lot of we're not separable from our environment, from our communities, from our heritage, from our ancestors, from the trauma that people prior to us have experienced. And so a lot of those, like what you're describing, Jul, that fear is often conditioning. And I like to think it does serve a purpose, like particularly maybe at some point in your life that was really important, to have like concern over getting vulnerable with people and making sure it was safe. And so I think what's really important is when we, from a mindfulness framework, when we notice anything like that coming up, like fear or anxiety about getting vulnerable and sharing, or self-doubt or self-criticism. I think it's really important just to, like, to the best of our abilities, allow that and hold that lovingly. Like really just kind of letting that be there, and like listening to the wisdom that that's trying to impart, which might just be like, hey, this is hard and this is scary, be careful. And sometimes it's possible just to like look at that and say, oh yes, like, okay, thank you, like, thanks for looking out, but I'm okay right now. Like maybe I can try this, maybe I do feel safe to step out, or maybe not. I mean, maybe it's telling you like, hey, this is not maybe the time or space to do this, and it's worth listening to. And so I think the important point is just how one is relating to that fear is what matters. The fact that it exists is just part of our human conditioning, and it's part of our opportunity to heal the traumas of our heritage. But the way we relate to that is what really matters.
Thank you. Yeah, and having practices that, I mean, the practice that we're learning, the somatic practices that I've been doing for many years, and now kind of a whole new level that we're learning in the training with Thomas Hubel's work, is about just sensing into our bodies. And if I'm afraid to share, if I'm afraid to reach out, and I'm afraid, whatever that is, anxious, depressed, that I just feel into my body and feel where that is in my body, and just be with that, and just give myself a lot of love and compassion, and let that just kind of like just hold myself. And then the next level that he's doing is like, how do we sense both ourselves and the other? So we come into a group and or collective. It's like this co-sensing practice that we develop as we learn to get better and better at just being present. It's just about, ultimately, all of this is really about just being present, right? I mean, isn't it kind of boiled down to that? And how mental health is really about how we've gotten unpresent and how we've dissociated from ourselves.
Yeah, I think I think that's right. Can you hear me? I cannot tell if I'm on or not.
Yes, you are on.
Yeah, Jul, I think you're just right on. I think you're right on. It's like, it's all of that. One of the practices is I was researching every Indigenous practice I could and experiencing it to the degree that, I was allowed and was able to find, that I found that was really awesome, was the practices of the Poponapona and the self-love. I think that, for me, that assisted me to be able to, take all the information I know about, that a sense of community and my self-worth from a cultural perspective. I didn't have, I didn't have somebody telling me that I'm not worthy. I grew up in a culture that said, we're all worthy. Don't come in here with your big education thinking you can change me. Who are you? It's like, we're all worthy, come with me as an equal and give me something I can really use. So it's like, I had that innate understanding, but as I moved myself through society and through my education and the things that I was doing, I did really begin to recognize a lot of suffering that I had with respect to my self-worth, and the way that I looked at myself as a woman, and the messages that I received growing up, and the way that they played out in my relationships. And so I engaged these practices, these self-love practices. One of them was as simple as looking in the mirror, for 2 minutes, like really timing it, because that's a long time to stare at yourself in the mirror and say, I love you, I love you, I love you. And, and then I did these exercises with our students as well, but we really began to talk about what self-love really truly means. And as we address this, there's a lot of tears, and there's a lot of realizations and a lot of release that comes in, as we begin to shed these stories that have attached onto us. And I like to say it that way, not that we've created, we don't create negative circumstances for ourselves knowingly. Maybe we perpetuate them through certain processes, through our conditioning. But once we're able to really begin to recognize that we can create different stories for ourselves, and the energy may still be in our body, because memory is in every cell of our body. And so when we've experienced trauma and we've addressed that trauma, for myself, I'd go, oh, wow, there's that feeling again. Look, I feel it all through my body. And just begin. And once I recognize it at that level, it doesn't hit me at the cognitive level, And that cognition will continue to reinforce that disallows the body at the cellular level to heal and to change. And eventually we even quit feeling that. And then it's just a memory that we have for the compassion that it has cultivated in our ability to help other people. So.
Yeah, wow. Ikela, I'm curious to hear your response to what Lisa just said, because that was, once again, Lisa, you're just pouring forth wisdom and abundance of wonderful insight. And one of the thoughts that I had there when you were talking was just about how important meditation practice is, because that gets us out of our such a lockdown identity that we have with our problems. And so that I'm curious, like, is that, can we Ikla, I know you have a very strong meditation practice, so I know you both do. So I'm just curious about meditation and how it relates to this.
For sure. Yeah, I think so. I think meditation is kind of a big term. It's like sports. When someone says they love sports, that can mean anything from basketball to like bowling. And so to frame, like I come at it from a very like mindfulness, Buddhist-based mindfulness and like compassion practice point of view. And I think the benefit of mindfulness is it just like, or that type of meditation is it kind of gives us opportunity to take perspective and to kind of get out of the narratives that Lisa was talking about that might be running the autopilot we're in, and kind of give us some critical distance to kind of from my point of view, to disidentify with what is happening in our minds and our bodies. As soon as we start to identify with like I am anxious, like there's this anxiousness in me and that is me, therefore I'm anxious, it gets really hard to heal through that. I think as soon as we can kind of see it as something coming through us that may be wisdom informed to some extent, working with it becomes a little bit easier. And I really like what you're saying too, Lisa, about like really just like practicing self-love and like meeting ourselves where we're at. And I have this, and with time, how things that might bother us can kind of eventually maybe go away. But I think it's important from my point of view, that's helped me heal a lot, is to remember that like the objective is not for these things to go away. The objective is like to relate to them in a loving and healthy way, in a beautiful way. Because to try to change ourselves from the inside out is a massive process. Good luck, like you can do all the yoga and meditation and dieting, and so long as we continue to strive to be something other than we're not, or other than we are, it's just going to be hard unnecessarily. I think true health is when we can kind of come into ourselves and hold ourselves in this moment as we are and realize we're okay and it's all right. And I have a teacher I love to listen to who says like the point of this whole thing, the point of all the practices, the point of all our lives is not to perfect ourselves, but to perfect our love. And I think that for me is like, that love is the relationship we have to those parts of us that are rising up, to the earth around us, to our communities. And so, yeah, I think mindfulness particularly has a role to play in that. But I also want to point a flag that I think sometimes it's used as a way of, again, putting that individualized emphasis on the problem, to say like, oh, you should just meditate more. Like, why not just meditate? Like if you meditate, you feel less anxious. And it's like, you can meditate and practice and do all these beautiful things, but to some extent, you're always going to be impacted by the world that's around you. And I just want to point a flag that it can be used unintentionally in a harmful way, to just point out that like, oh, meditation is the way to go, because it again places that emphasis on the individual who needs to be meditating versus the collective who may benefit from the individual meditating. That's very real, but to stop there is not a full addressing of what we're facing right now.
Thank you for that. That is really important caveat about meditation. And it's like, it kind of brings up a whole other subject, which I want to do another podcast on, which is the balance of being and doing, and, the inner and the outer aspects of our ongoing work, on ourselves and in the system that we're in. And you reminded me of a story I just heard recently from a friend who was talking about a real thing that happened. It was a good analogy about how she was living at a I think it was a monastery or an ashram or something, and there was a big wildfire, and she stayed up all night with just a handful of others, putting out all these little wildfires everywhere, exhausting herself all night long. And then in the morning, when they put out all the fires, there was all the people that would spent, meditators, right? They're just going to sit and meditate at the fire, and like, no, it's like you need to like actually get out there and put out the fire, and so there is this kind of magical thinking about like, okay, I'm just gonna do my spiritual work, and everything's gonna just be better. But it's a both and, we have to do that inner work while we continue to try to make the world around us a better place, and do our part and be responsible to what needs to be done. And so finding that balance, I think, is an ongoing issue. It's never like we get there, like you said, Ikela. It's just like, it's not like we don't arrive there. It's like every day we have to find where that balance is for ourselves. So that's what resilience is, right?
Absolutely, that's resilience. And it is kind of a balancing act. I mean, from what I came up with in my writings and my readings is that from an Indigenous perspective, we came here to this Earth star to cleanse and purify, not just ourselves, but everybody else, or whatever our community, I don't know, and to experience the beauty that is Mother Earth, and so we get this physical experience to be here at this time, and seeking that balance that's the journey. Sometimes we're out there and sometimes we bring ourselves back, and sometimes we hit it just right, and we want to remember what that feels like, and we want to sustain that in a beautiful way. When we do that through other means that may cause destruction in other ways, it's oftentimes, there's that, we continue to create that imbalance. But anyway, that's way macro out there.
Yeah, well, it's, I mean, there's so many different threads here we could keep going on, but I'm just wondering if both of you could just, I mean, I know you've shared a lot, Lisa, about some practical things like reconnecting to the earth and Indigenous, I mean, kind of embracing a more Indigenous way of of doing mental health, and um, I'm just wondering, like, what are some things um, that we can share with people out there that they can do right now, that, I mean, I know you already shared a lot about that, connect to the earth, walk out in nature, but what's like a practice that maybe Ikola, maybe you can share your mindfulness practice or something now, something for people to just like, what can support people out there the best, in a day-to-day basis when they start to feel a little like they're going off, they're spinning out or something like that. What can bring us back in that moment?
Sure. Maybe it might be best displayed through like actual just leading a quick practice, if that's cool. Maybe like
Sure.
5 minutes or so. Yeah. So this is something that I have really enjoyed doing, particularly when I have intense emotion states coming up. And I tend to be an anxious type of person. And so anxiety is often the thing that I sit with. And so maybe I'll just like invite us or whoever is listening to just kind of take a moment, sit in a way that feels comfortable. And maybe just like, I like to close my eyes, makes it a little more intimate, but that's not required by any means. You can keep them open if that feels more comfortable. But maybe just bring to mind like a situation that's somewhat arousing in a challenging way, like some situation you've experienced recently that's kind of brought up some emotions of reactivity, some type of suffering maybe, and maybe not the most intense, maybe not like a 10 out of 10 or anything like that, but maybe like something like a 3 or 4 out of 10, something that just kind of invigorated the nervous system a little bit. And just kind of reflect on that for a minute, let it come to mind. Maybe you remember it visually. Maybe you remember it through a story. Just however you can best recall that event. Just let it come up real quick. And once it's there, once you're feeling it, to whatever extent you are, I like to just right away just take a few deep breaths, like breathing in for 4 seconds, breathing out for 4 seconds, doing that like 4 times maybe. And this is just a way of just taking care of the physical body, taking care of the nervous system. When we face challenges, our nervous system lights up and it tries to take good care of us, by heightening, and by bringing some arousal and making us hyper focused on the problem. And unfortunately, that can shut down our ability to kind of reason and see it from a more zoomed out perspective. And so just by breathing deeply, we can calm the nervous system down and just love this body a little bit in the challenging moment. And then once we've kind of opened the nervous system to a little bit more of a spacious place, however best we can, I like to just start by like welcoming whatever is present, whatever emotion you're feeling in the body in this moment. See if you can identify it, like maybe it's in the chest, maybe it's a tightness. And can we just welcome this? Like we're greeting a dear friend. Like, oh, hello. Hey. And we're not doing this to try to make it go away or to change it, but really just to kind of really meet it kindly. Like, hello, like this too. This is welcome. And it's interesting to notice as we do this, the suffering or the reaction, the aversion we have towards it can reduce at times. A lot of the times what's hardest is when we want to push something away or have it leave. But as soon as we can kind of open to it, suddenly things get a bit softer and a bit lighter. And then once we've welcomed it, maybe we can just kind of ask it silently in our mind, like, what are you here to show me? What are you trying to share with me today? And the tone of which we ask that is important. Not what are you trying to show me? But what are you trying to show me, my friend? What's here? Hey. Just notice if anything pops to mind. And whatever comes to mind, we don't need to take it as truth. We don't need to believe it right away. Just let it come, welcome that too. And when it's ready to leave, just let it leave the mind. Let that thought go. You're really listening to the wisdom that that emotion is trying to carry for us. Just for a few more breaths. And then just in the last couple minutes here, once we've welcomed that, once we've inquired and seen if there's anything that wanted to be shown to us, and sometimes there might not be, and that's okay. We just meet that with kindness too. Maybe just expand your awareness to more of a collective point of view and realize that you're likely, or you're definitely not the only person experiencing this emotion in this moment. That you're actually connected to the totality of the human experience. Not only the humans alive on the earth in this moment who are experiencing this, but the humans who are here before you, who've experienced these emotions, and the humans who will come after you who've experienced these. And can we just hold ourselves as part of this bigger community? And maybe can we feel into the earth who's held all of these human beings who felt all of these emotions since as soon as we arose on this beautiful place. Here's been the earth underneath all of us. And kind of like a dear mother who would hold us when we're afraid as a child or hurting as a child, can we just allow the earth to kind of wrap itself around us to offer us some stability. And then finally, the last thing I like to do with this is thank the earth, thank the humans who we're a part of, thank ourselves for holding that emotion, thank that emotion for bringing some information to us. And finally, just ask yourself the question, having seen this, having felt this, having welcomed this, what is it that my heart most yearns for right now? And how do I best respond? Just letting whatever arise come up, not necessarily having to cling to it as truth or dive in and try to figure it out. Just trust your heart to reveal it to you if it's the right time. And then keep in mind that this practice is not to perfect yourself, but to perfect your love, to do what you can. I like from there to just kind of come back to whatever I'm doing. Whether a conversation or a project, traffic. Yeah.
Hmm. Gratitude for that practice, Ikela. That was really, really, really good. Hmm.
Now, I'll maybe just add that that's something that I maybe drew out over about 5 minutes or so there, but that's really nice to do if you have the space and time for a longer period. You can do that for 15 minutes. Really kind of sit with yourself. Really let the thoughts and emotions come up. Could be pretty helpful. But it's also nice, and if you got 2 minutes real quick before your next meeting, kind of take a deep breath, notice what's there, welcome it, and just feel connected.
Yeah, thank you. That's a good daily practice, and yeah, and a good reminder, for to stop whenever we're feeling like we're spinning or triggered, just to stop and check in with ourselves. So huge, huge maintenance, mental health maintenance. And then the healing part is like doing it on a deeper level, kind of for a longer time and just really, really deepening into that, right?
Doing it with community, doing it with
Community.
support, and
Yeah.
doing it in nature, you know.
Yeah. And with all the things that Lisa shared about, making sure that we put good food in our bodies and we have, good water and all of these things come together for making us well as we can be, in these times so that we can really show up for what's needed in our lives and in our communities. So we've got like about, I don't know, maybe 12 minutes to just sort of wrap this conversation to, I mean, it's such a big subject and obviously we not being comprehensive in any way, but kind of looping back to, just like the system. And I mean, we've talked about, you both have shared a lot about, your perspectives on what brings mental health and how to, in some ways, to do that. And I'm just wondering now, like if, as we come to some closing, just thoughts and insights, um, what are ways that you see us going in our communities at large with mental health and the needs that are out there, and what do you personally um, uh, feel committed to helping with as well? Um, I don't know if that question is very clear, but just kind of like just sort of a synopsis of what we're dealing with here on the mental health world, at large, just the system, what people are dealing with in the world, and some of the things that you see are answering that need, and then what you're particularly doing in that need. Does that make sense? Okay. So whoever wants to jump in. All right, I'll call on you, Lisa.
I think Lisa's trying to get her mic on. We're not hearing you just yet, Lisa.
Oh, okay. Yeah, you got to unmute, Lisa.
Unmute.
Oh, you had it for a second. You had it for a second. It's still muted now, though.
Unmute. Now am I unmuted?
Yeah, yeah, you are.
Um, well, I am since I left the university, I have gotten involved in quite a few projects with tribal nations. And so I'm doing some evaluation research. I talked a little bit about that and just assisting tribes with their evaluative part on health programs. So that's kind of been my bread and butter. I've been able to use my education to help bridge the understanding of what is effective in tribal nations with respect to their health programs. So that's been really exciting work. And then I've also been on some panels to develop some Indigenous ways of knowing in trauma-informed mental health care for families and children in Native communities. So that's been really wonderful. And I've been engaging my own practices, my own ceremonial practices, and I do provide services that I no longer have to worry about providing a license for. Just some one-on-one services, from my cultural teachings and from the experience that I've had and where I've engaged myself. So I do have a private kind of private practice going. And probably the primary thing that I'm engaged in that is my own continued growth. I'm paying attention to my life and to my impact, and really experimenting with, well, what other things can I change? What other things can I do to live in a way that keeps me connected, that's sustainable for my life, rather than I recognized all the stress that I had been through trying to meet deadlines and all those kinds of things. And so, mainly I'm engaging my own practices and my own ability to be present and hold space when I am called on to do prayers and to help others. And anytime I get an opportunity to share anything, I'm grateful to do that. Thank you so much for inviting me. And it's always a pleasure to share with the things that you're doing. Julie, you know how to bring people together, the thoughts and the experiences that you have within your own life and your own practice. And so I'm just really grateful for your heart. And it's always a pleasure. So thank you so much. I'll just say one more thing, for the last thing that I just want to say to everybody else is, washishu ahu I dehuya et stotulia nangangangawe wisha hutuwe we ejabgabagi watli wapi madua. We're all in this together. It's good to be here with all of you, everybody out there who's listening, who's gotten this far, that's listening to this. I just really want to extend my prayers and gratitude for all the work that we're doing together. It's so much more powerful when we come together, and these conversations are incredibly powerful. And so thank you very much. And, it's an honor.
Yeah. I think to answer your question, Jewel, and kind of share my final thoughts is I'm basically I'm doing what I can to tend to the part of the garden that I can actually touch in this world. There's a lot of things out there that are far outside my control at this point in time. And there's a lot of things that I am still learning and still growing myself to be able to tend to them in a beautiful way. I'm still a student, so I'm still learning a lot, still meeting a lot of deadlines, all those things. But yeah, I think that's really it. Is like, for me, it's a real reflection on like, what am I able to do right now, today? And sometimes that's just like taking care of myself, and like, if I tend to that with the best of my ability, it might not always be beautiful and perfect, but I can rest in that intention and the noble intention of trying to make things a little more beautiful in the world. And I have especially after this conversation, I mean, it's even more highlighted, but I have a deep trust that like we will be okay. Like it's important to recognize that as humans, we have a tendency to hyper focus on the negative things going on, and we can really lose the beauty of what's happening around us. And we actually live in a pretty significant time. The amount of people that I'm able to have conversations like this with is amazing. The fact that all three of us are together from three different backgrounds, three friends who just are here to share and love, like that is amazing. And so I'm confident that things will be okay. And I think if there's anything I could say to close on, is just to remember that like the paradigm of mental health that we've been fed from Western biomedical culture, that views mental health as a problem or as a disorder, is just one frame. And I think it's quite an unhealthy and untrue frame. The things that we might call mental health disorders do have adaptive purposes in certain situations. And systems have a way of balancing themselves out, of like really stabilizing and reaching homeostasis. And I think when we can take that understanding towards ourselves, if we have any parts of us that we worry or have been told are disordered or bad or broken, to remember that there's wisdom there, and to trust that, and to know that you're not a problem, and that the things that you're experiencing right now are needed on this earth. Like we all have a voice that is so desperately in need of being heard, even if it's just within our small garden that we might exist in at the time. So I'm very grateful to you, Jul, to be able to come and share my small voice that I have at this 24-year point of my life with you, you, Lisa, and everyone who's listening. Is really a joy. And I would just say, like, don't worry. Like, I think we're gonna be all right. Like from the perspective of a younger person just now entering the world, all of us like just want to be loved and want to love. And that gives me a lot of hope and a lot of confidence that we'll figure this thing out. It's going to take action. It's going to take time. It's going to be weird. But as long as we can just hold ourselves and each other with love, I think we'll make it.
Wow, beautiful, beautifully said, both of you. And yeah, I mean, like on that note, it's all the songs are right. All you need is love. It's just ultimately that it does kind of come down to that. But love in action. I know somebody wrote in a comment in there that says perfect. It's not about perfecting ourselves, but perfecting our love, which I thought was really well said. It's it's compassion and remembering. Well, mental uh, uh, unwellness is disconnection and disowned parts of ourselves. And as we reconnect and love those parts of ourselves and create a culture that makes it okay to to be loved in our quote unquote brokenness, is the culture I think that you're speaking to, Ikela, that we're moving towards. And that is very empowering, as opposed to giving our power away to an expert that gives a name, a diagnosis, and pathologizes that problem and separates us. And then, okay, now, we are in this power relationship where somebody's got the answer and then you're the patient and they're going to fix you. So that's the old paradigm that we are moving away from, and realizing that we have the power. We do need to help. We do need support, people that do have knowledge. It's not saying that that's not needed, and therapists are important for having that support. But ultimately, this is about coming home to ourselves, right? Coming home to our own hearts and knowing that we have the power within us, that we just need to help each other bring that out, to reconnect, help each other, remind each other that we can heal, and that we can heal this world, and when we'll see that, I don't know. But obviously, I love what you said, Ikela, about you're just working with the garden that you can touch. I mean, I think that's a super healthy thing to way to see it, as opposed to, I think another big mental problem is that we look at the whole world and we get overwhelmed by how all the problems, and then we think, oh my God, we're never going to, climate change, we're never going to heal it all. But if we just focus on our garden and our own lives, that's enough. Because if everybody's doing that, then it's all going to get done, right? So that was such a beautiful insight, and doing everything that Lisa's you shared, and the meditations, and and just staying tuned into our hearts and giving ourselves so much compassion, for where we kind of show up a little bit weird, it's like, that's okay. It's human. This is a human journey we're on. And let's love each other in our challenges, and in our strengths, and in our gifts, and come together and find ways to come together more. And like you, Ikela, I do have hope. I know that, there are a lot of people that are despairing about the world. I mean, that's not, my eyes are open to what's going on, but I also feel hope because I do see young folks like you just, really waking up, really bringing amazing light. And I do think people are waking up. And so I have hope. I'm optimistic, but not without, real work that we have to do together. So, ah, I hope that both of you can come back for another conversation, and maybe even, Ikela, maybe if you want to even host another conversation, I would love that. Let's see, we'll see if we can make that happen. And Lisa, as always, you're absolutely just, I'm just so blessed. I feel so blessed to know you both, and um, be, be in conversation with you. So thank you, and thank you all for who have watched, and who will watch the recording. And we'll see you next time. This is the Regenerative Consciousness Rising podcast, and stay tuned for more topics. See you later.